December 1952. London was entering a freezing winter. Across the city, millions of homes and factories were burning coal to survive the cold. At first, everything seemed normal. Buses moved through the streets, workers went to their jobs, and people continued their daily routines. But above the rooftops, something was beginning to change. Smoke from thousands of chimneys was filling the cold air. Then, a strange weather condition trapped that polluted air close to the ground. The smoke had nowhere to go. And slowly, London began disappearing into a thick yellow-gray haze. What looked like ordinary fog was becoming something far more dangerous. As the hours passed, the smog became thicker. Visibility dropped dramatically. People could barely see what was directly in front of them. Buses slowed down. Drivers struggled to find their way through the streets. Pedestrians walked cautiously, sometimes using buildings as guides. The polluted air even entered homes, and the city became strangely quiet. But the most frightening part was that many people still believed this was simply another heavy London fog. They didn't yet understand what they were breathing. For several days, the smog remained trapped over the city. London was no longer simply covered in fog. It was trapped inside a layer of polluted air. The effects soon became impossible to ignore. Hospitals began receiving increasing numbers of patients suffering from breathing problems. Doctors and nurses worked through crowded hospital corridors. People with existing respiratory problems were especially vulnerable. Outside, the smog continued to cover the city. And because the pollution was concentrated close to the ground, every breath exposed people to the contaminated air. The strange event was no longer just a transportation problem. It had become a public health crisis. Yet at the time, scientists and officials were still trying to understand exactly what was happening. What had turned London's familiar winter fog into something so dangerous? The answer was hidden in London's atmosphere. The city was producing enormous amounts of smoke from coal. Normally, that smoke could rise and disperse. But during the Great Smog, a temperature inversion formed. Cold air became trapped near the ground, while warmer air remained above it. The polluted air was effectively sealed beneath this invisible layer. Smoke, sulfur dioxide, and other pollutants accumulated over the city. And instead of disappearing into the atmosphere, the pollution stayed where people were breathing. For several days, London was essentially sitting inside its own pollution. When the weather finally changed, the smog began to disappear. But the consequences remained. After the smog cleared, the scale of the tragedy became increasingly clear. Scientists, doctors, and government officials began examining the connection between London's air and the deaths that followed. The disaster created enormous pressure for change. Britain began moving towards stronger controls on smoke and coal burning. The Clean Air Act of 1956 became one of the major results of this growing movement. London slowly began changing the way it dealt with air pollution. The Great Smog had shown something that could no longer be ignored. Air pollution wasn't just unpleasant. Under the right conditions, it could become deadly. Today, London looks completely different. The streets are filled with modern vehicles, buildings, and millions of people. But the atmosphere is no longer regularly buried beneath the kind of deadly coal smoke that covered the city in 1952. The Great Smog became a warning about what can happen when industrial pollution meets the wrong environmental conditions. For several days, one of the world's greatest cities could barely see, and thousands of people were exposed to dangerously polluted air. More than 70 years later, the event remains one of the most important environmental disasters in British history. Because sometimes the greatest danger isn't something you can see coming. Sometimes it's simply the air around you